So we're looking at chapter 2, and I wanted to view verse 19 down through verse 23. Matthew chapter 2, verse 19 down through verse 23. Jesus by this time is something like 2 years of age, 1 to 2 years of age. They've been in Egypt for maybe about 6 months. He may be a little older at that point. He may be pushing 3, but they have now got the word in verse 19 to come back from Egypt land and to be reestablished in Israel. And so they are making that trip. And the story goes something like this, Matthew chapter 2, beginning at verse 19. Now when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the young child's life are dead. Then he arose, took the young child and his mother, came into the land of Israel. And when he had heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned by God in a dream, he turned aside into the region of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. Let's bow in prayer. Lord, sense a trembling spirit in my own heart, because maybe this whole approach this morning is way too personal, and maybe it only applies to me. But erase any confusion and any attempt of the Satan to bring about wrong motives and see things that aren't there, and bring the clarity of your word. Surely you want to say something to all of us, including me. So speak to us today. In your name we pray. Amen. In any study of any particular passage, you've got to go automatically back to the theme of the book. You just can't reach into a book, and we are learning this, of course, in saturation. It's a part of the very essence of all that we believe in studying the Scriptures. That Matthew didn't write in a vacuum. He wrote with a distinct purpose in mind. He was viewing his culture. He was viewing the dynamics of his situation, what he had experienced. And when you couple with that the movement of the Holy Spirit, it becomes very, very significant. So as you look at this passage, you have to look at the theme of the book of Matthew. And of course, the kingly Messiah is the theme. There isn't any question about that. So every chapter, every paragraph has to come back to that theme. You dare not interpret any passage in Matthew outside of the perimeters of that theme. He is writing for the purpose of convincing us that Jesus Christ was and is the kingly Messiah. And you see that strongly as you move from chapter 1. He starts with the genealogy, as we've learned. And of course, in the genealogy, the whole purpose of that genealogy is to present to us the kingly Messiah. He is of the lineage of King David and has a right to sit on the throne, as was prophesied and promised by God to King David, that of his flesh would come a king who would reign forever and ever. And that is being fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. So any Jew who's reading the first 17 verses of Matthew is going to go walk away from that thing saying, wow, this Jesus fulfills the first requirement for being the kingly Messiah. So, hey, I can believe in him. Then he launches into these 4 Christmas narratives. And of course, the narratives we've broken down not because we wanted them to be that way, but because Matthew breaks them down, and he begins every narrative with a particular word. And I know if you look at your translation, they'll start with different words because they've translated the same Greek word in different ways. But the Greek word that starts every one of these narratives is the Greek word de, and it is translated primarily, the primary translation of the word is the conjunction but. So when you come to verse 18, he begins the narrative with, but the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. That's the first narrative, and we're calling that the emerging of the king, because it's here that the whole dilemma that Joseph finds himself in is solved by the angel, and he, of course, gets with the program, and the marriage is accomplished, and the child is born, and the Messiah has arrived. God is indeed with us. The second narrative in chapter 2, verse 1, again begins with the word but, which you realize, again, sets up contrast. So all of these contrasts are being, narratives are being contrasted one with the other. So as you begin to study the contrast, it becomes very, very vivid. And next Sunday morning, we hope to get into some of those contrasts, because it's startling, the contrast that he gives us. But the second narrative is, we're calling it the exaltation of the king through the wise men, of course, because they've come announcing the fact that the king is on the scene. And they've come to Jerusalem knowing he is a Jewish-born king. And they're running up and down the streets, grabbing everybody they can, saying, "Where is your new king? Where is your new king?" Thinking everyone would know. And can you imagine, he was just born 5 miles down the road, and they didn't have a clue. It took a bunch of pagans to come from Babylon, who were wise men, who were astrologers, who didn't even believe in Jehovah God. It took a bunch of them to come and tell us and announce that, hey, our king is born. Isn't that a slap in the face? Would it be awful, so awful, if we got so far away from the gospel that we'd have to have a bunch of to come and tell us who we... Never mind. Jesus, forgive us. The third narrative is verse 13, begins in verse 13, and we're calling it the escape of the king to Egypt, because Herod, of course, has gotten really upset, and he has pronounced an edict that's going to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and their surrounding district, which is an awful tragedy. And if you say, well, how many were there? Bethlehem really wasn't that big of a town. And when you isolate it down to the idea of baby boys 2 years of age and under, they calculate out it, and there might have been around 20 to 30 babies that were killed. So we're not talking masses, but one is too many. Do you agree? One is way too many. So baby boys are slaughtered, and moms are upset, and dads are mourning, and homes are broken all over this birth of a Jesus. So the angel of the Lord appears, of course, and says, hey, Joseph, get up, get this woman out of here, get the child out of here. And they load up on a donkey. They don't take the pictures off the wall. No packing is done. It's just, wow, get out of here. In the midnight hours, they're running for their lives. And they are headed into Egypt land. And they go there for exile, of course. And again, you realize that they're living while they were there, probably for about 6 months. Their living was provided by the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that were the gifts of the wise men. Then you come to this final narrative. It's the excursion of the king from Egypt, so Jesus is now coming back. And as we read, Herod is dead, and of course there's some things that never change until some people die. Thank God for death. So Herod is dead. He's gone, and everybody's breathing a sigh of relief, saying, whoa, glad he's gone. I wonder how people will react at your death. That's a serious thought, isn't it? Gather around your casket and say, oh, finally. Wow. Well, let's not go there. So Herod is dead. And an angel of the Lord appears in a dream in the night hour and says, hey, Joseph, come on back. Everything is clear. Herod who sought the life of the Christ child is gone. So it's very broad, as we talked last night in verse 20, come back to the land of Israel. And of course, as they come back, of course, they were probably headed for Bethlehem. And they were all set up to be in Bethlehem and come back to where they had been living, the house they had gotten, get their pictures back, get the money from some of the contracts that Joseph had finished and didn't get paid for because he left in the middle of the night. And hey, it's a good scene. It's only 5 miles from Jerusalem. It's an excellent place for Jesus to be raised. He'll rub shoulders with the best people. And as they get close, of course, they're eating at McDonald's, and they have this Big Mac, and as they're chewing away, this guy in the next booth is speaking, and he's probably a preacher because you can hear him. It's okay. So, he's got a big mouth, so everybody in the place can hear him. So he's talking about Archelaus, who's the son of Herod, and he's as bad as his dad. And so Joseph gets scared and says, wow, if he's as bad as his dad, oh man, his dad was out to kill the Christ child. What will his son do? So he's scared to death. And so he decides to ask God where exactly they are to go. And of course, they went to Nazareth, that we might all be Nazarenes. Thank you, Jesus. That's the story. Now, interesting. It's a wonderful morning, isn't it? In these four narratives, there are some linkages that tie these things together, which are really exciting to me. And I want to just walk you through them and land on one. One is the idea of the divine prompting. In every one of these narratives, God is taking the initiative. That's really significant, folks. This is not out of control. This is not, oh, good night, what is going on? This is God is in control. God is rescuing. God is on the scene. God is manipulating. God is seeing what's going on. God is directing. God has a plan. God is prompting. There is divine initiative going on. For instance, in chapter 1, verse 20, Joseph, all this hangs on Joseph. Do you realize what would have taken place if Joseph had said, hey, I'm stoning that woman to death? By Jewish law, he could do that. But see, God intervenes and says, hey, boy, line up. I got a plan. This is all going down the way it should go down, and you get in on it. Come on, son. And can you imagine, the whole plan of God's redemption for a world hung on the positive response of one man. That's significant. So God intervened in this situation. And you see it strongly in this first narrative. You see it in the second narrative. The angels, or the wise men, they've seen a star. And of course, you could get into that, how God, of course, is revealing through a star. But he actually comes when they find the Christ child and warns them to go home another way. I mean, it's a divine intervention. Don't go back to Herod and don't report back to him like he's conning you. Move in a direction. That's verse 12, chapter 2, verse 12. Go in another direction. And of course, then you come to verse 13. And the same angel of the Lord, the same God of ours, gets through to Joseph again and says, hey, get out of here. And off to Egypt they go, and the Christ child is saved. It's a phenomenal story. So God intervenes again in verse 13. Now down in verse 19, of course, we have another divine intervention. That Herod is dead, it's safe to come back. So all is okay. So come on back. So God intervenes again. So time after time after time. Do you want to look back in your life? Time after time after time. Would you calculate this out in your own living? Time after time after time after time. God just distinctly intervenes. And things are different. Do you know how close I've been to missing it? And God intervened. Just intervened. Just, wow. Where I could have been. What could have happened? But it didn't happen. Why? God intervened. Whew, thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. So divine prompting is very, very powerful in the passage. Another linkage in these four narratives is not only divine prompting, but divine prophecy. It's significant that right in the middle of every one of these stories, he stops dead in his tracks and says, oh, this is that which was fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. And then he gives the prophecy. In chapter 1, he does that. He's telling this phenomenal story of Joseph and all the dilemma and the angel of the Lord coming. And then in verse 21, down in verse 22 rather, so all of this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. And then he gives this Isaiah thing, a virgin with a child shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. So all of this is a long-range plan. Now, he does that at not just one, but all the narratives. He does it down in verse 6 of chapter 2 about Bethlehem and the location of where the Christ was going to be born. He does it down in verse 15, out of Egypt I've called my son, a prophecy. He does it in the passage we're reading down in verse 23. This was spoken by the prophets. So time and time again, he just interjects this, hey guys, this is a divine God who has an overwhelming plan, and nothing has happened chance here. That's beautiful, isn't it? Did you know you've been prophesied about in the scriptures? You're alive. Man, you're important. God's talked about you. Beautiful. Well, let's go to the divine pointer. This brings up a subject that scares me a lot, and I normally stay away from it, but I had to deal with it in this passage. Just didn't have any choice, but I had to deal with it in this passage. It's called typology. See, in the Old Testament, there is this verbal predictive prophecy given to us, which means there's this guy who stands on his hind legs, and out of his lips come these words. And whoa, 100 years, 400 years, 500 years later, whoa, it happens. That's verbal predictive prophecy. A guy actually said it, and it happened. I think there are, I forgot the number, 336 or over 300 verbal predictive prophecies about Jesus. And the probability of one man fulfilling all of them. I've given you this before, but somebody said the probability of 1 out of 80 with 100 zeros after it, which is more than's coming in the offering today. So this is, that's startling. I mean, that's literally impossible. I mean, no, it isn't going to happen. I know. One guy, all of these verbal predictive prophecies were fulfilled. But there's also a more subtle prophecy going on in the scriptures. It's called typology. It's symbolism. See, that God just didn't have a prophet show up every now and then and say something great, and everybody goes, whoa, what's that mean? And then years later it came to pass. God wrote into the normal day in and day out structure of our lives these symbols that we have to handle and look at and we go through, and they all point to something really significant that's going to happen in God's plan. And they are prophecies. The most obvious, of course, is the sacrifice lamb. Do you know how many sacrifice lambs they offered in a year time? Oh, mercy. Thousands and thousands and thousands of them. It is reported that in 1 week in Jerusalem, that 1 week feast of the Passover, they offered 250,000 lambs in that one city down at the temple. It was a slaughterhouse, folks. And every one of those lambs was a pointing finger, a symbol, a prophecy as they handled it, as they ate the flesh of that lamb, as they sacrificed its blood, it yelled at them, oh, there is going to be the lamb. He's coming. And they did that year after year after year after year after year. And it was all a type of the coming Christ. So that's one of the most obvious. But in our passage, now you're not Jews, I understand, so you don't get it. But if you'd been a Jew reading this thing, there would have been some things that would have automatically popped into your head, and you'd say, this sounds like Moses. And woven, Matthew did this on purpose, woven into the passage and into the stories is this undercurrent of this typology of the guy by the name of Moses. Moses, how did he get into the story? You know his story. It's a phenomenal one. I want to give you 2 ideas. I want to hammer this. I want you to get it. I believe it's really important. for your spiritual integrity. One idea I want you to get out of this is that there is never that intervention equals purpose. See, Moses is a type of the Christ. Moses and Jesus have so many similarities. Moses is a great deliverer of the children of Israel out of the bondage of Egypt. Jesus is a great deliverer of the people of God out of the bondage of sin. So you got these parallels. Moses, this political leader called Pharaoh, wanted to destroy him, ruin him, end him, take his life. Herod the Great, in wrath and anger, went after all the baby boys, as Pharaoh did, to kill the Christ child Jesus. See, you got these similarities. Moses, to escape, went into exile, into the wilderness, spent 40 years there. Jesus, to escape, went into the exile, Egypt land, and stayed there for 6 months. Moses was called back to his homeland. Jesus is called back to his homeland. See, you got all of this similarity between them, and that's interwoven into this story. But what I want to convince you is that there is never divine intervention without the fact of overwhelming purpose. God never, never, never intervenes in a person's life except there is overwhelming, significant purpose in that intervention. God is never out for a good time. God is never, let's try this. God is never, just on a whim, why not? God is never, let's attempt this. Never, never. God knows exactly what he wants to do, and when he intervenes, there is overwhelming divine purpose involved. God has distinct purpose involved, never just for the fun of it. If God ever speaks to your life, you want to say, whoa, what's the purpose? If there is no purpose, then it's not him speaking. If God tells you to get an umbrella, it's going to rain, son. You can count on it. Because when God speaks, there is an overwhelming plan and great purpose is involved. So when God speaks, it demands. What did I say? It demands response. And if you do not respond when God speaks, you are declaring war against the divine plan of God. And you don't want to do that. Because you won't win. You will not win. Are we getting it? So when God intervenes, when God speaks, he always has purpose in mind. You can absolutely count on that. Several years ago, I got, how do you state it? I was going to say I got involved with psychics. Not exactly involved with psychics, but what I mean is, it's an intriguing subject, and it began to show up a lot around the church, and people doing psychic kind of things. So I really got interested in it, and where that fits in. And I've lost my keys, and I say, "Oh God, where's my keys?" And I find them. Well. What if you aren't a Christian and you do that? Wow. Well, does God answer those kind of prayers? Was it God, or is it? See, what's going on here? So psychic things. One of the things I discovered about the whole psychic world is, and those kinds of things is, that the psychic comes along and says, whoa, whoa. And the next thing you know, they're saying to you, they're telling you things about yourself that they should know. And you're saying, that's impressive, isn't it? When somebody knows something about you that they should know. How'd they find that out? Well, there's this. It's psychic. The problem with the whole thing ended up to be this. They know things about me that they should know. So what? What of it? What's it mean? Oh, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? I don't know. Where's it going? I don't know. God's never that way, folks. When God comes and speaks, purpose. When God speaks, you know what to do. When God speaks, there's divine plan. When God speaks, it matters. It's not just, oh, that's impressive. God isn't out to impress you. God is out for the fulfillment of an overwhelming plan. That's what's going on here. So when God speaks, I'm telling you, when divine intervention demands a plan, demands purpose. Now, in light of that, let's go to the Moses story. Oh, it's a great story, isn't it? How did they get in Egypt land in the first place? Well, the Joseph thing. You know all about Joseph and the coat of many colors, and he went and became Pharaoh's right-hand man after a while and distributed the food during a famine and was responsible for getting the food in the first place, and it's just great. And then his brothers moved there, and the reconciliation took place. So Israel landed in Egypt land. And, of course, by the time you get to Moses, all the people, it says, that knew Joseph died. So a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph was now on the throne. And the Israelite people have become really strong. I mean, multiplied. So right in the middle of all these Egyptians, you've got this strong nationality of people called the Hebrews. And they're just getting more and more and owning more and stronger and stronger. And Pharaoh gets all upset because, hey, what if they decided to take over? So we can't have that. So he assigned taskmasters and basically brought Israel under slavery. So now every day they go out and work and they don't get paid for it. They're slaves and they're cracking the whip and they're going after them. But that doesn't stop God and doesn't stop the Hebrews. They just keep growing, man, and getting stronger and stronger and stronger and more population. And Pharaoh says, we got to end this. So he declares a decree to all the midwives who are working with the Israelites. And the midwives are to take every baby boy and kill it the minute it's born. Except God creates a miracle, and wow, the ladies are giving birth without pain, so they don't need a midwife. Whoa, so baby boys are spared. Well, that isn't working too well. So you got population expanding, and Israel's getting stronger and bigger and strong. So Pharaoh comes along and says, well, since that didn't work, I'll just have my soldiers go and kill all the baby boys. So here they are going through all the Israelite homes. Every baby boy, wham, he's dead. And the mourning that's going on, but this kid is born. And they hide him. But you can only do that so long. So now we're at the age where you can't hide that kid. So this child's mother, this is an old story to you, but this child's mother goes down to the Nile River and gets these weeds, weaves them together and puts mud in, makes a little ark, puts this baby in there. Puts that thing on the Nile River. It goes off. Miriam, who's the sister and daughter of the mother, and sister to the baby in the ark, follows it on the shore to see what happens. And it floats down, and can you believe it? Pharaoh's daughter decided to take a bath. And while she's bathing in the Nile River, here comes this little, what's that? Goes over, finds this babe, falls in love with this baby, adopts this baby. Well, you're going to have someone feed this baby. That's true. Need someone to take care of this baby. That's true. How are you going to do that? Miriam is on the scene saying, hey, I know someone who would do that. And Moses' mother, these are neat coincidences, aren't they? Moses' mother actually raises this child. That's a phenomenal story, isn't it? And he's actually taken into Pharaoh's court, educated in Pharaoh's land, educated in Pharaoh's schools, knows the territory backwards and forwards. Wow. Well, wasn't that nice? Purpose, friend. What's God doing? Raising up a deliverer. Moses, the deliverer. God has distinct purpose in mind. He's going to be a lawgiver. He's going to go to Mount Sinai before this is over and receive the very law of God. He's going to establish the Israelite nation because he is an Israelite. God is going to establish the Israelite nation under him. They're going to track through the wilderness. They're going to go into the promised land. And above all, out of that, you know what's going to happen? A Messiah is going to be born out of this nation. God is raising up a nation out of this group, and Moses is the deliverer. Purpose. God has overwhelming purpose. God that never intervenes. You think all of that was happen chance? God was just doing something for the fun of it? God was absolutely intervening in the life of one man for overwhelming purpose. The Moses story. Now, what we're dealing with is the parallel to that. That's symbolic prophecy, typology. We're dealing with the Jesus story. Oh, the Jesus story. What a phenomenal story. And we've already walked through it. Joseph. Oh, the whole thing hung on Joseph. Mary's with child. Joseph knows he's not responsible. Good night. He can't marry the gal because he would be admitting he is guilty. He's responsible for this, and he's not. And he's a just man. He should have her stoned to death. He doesn't want to do that. He decides just to give her a divorce. And, of course, divorce in that day was you just wrote out a 3x5 card. I divorce you, hand it to her, and kick her out the door. So that was the end of that. So she's gone. So he's divorced her. It's over. Except in the night hour, God intervenes. Joseph, this has divine purpose. What's going on and what you're going through has divine purpose. There's something going on here bigger than you. Wise men are coming. What's going on? Divine purpose. You know all this story. The Egypt thing, God is intervening. Divine purpose. Come back. Divine purpose. God is raising up a deliverer. He is Jesus. This is a Jesus story. Oh, get this. Isn't it interesting that the whole Moses story is all about the Jesus story? And the reason for the Moses story is the Jesus story. And remove the Moses story and you don't have a Jesus story. So the Moses story is all about what God is doing in one man by the name of Moses. It's all about building to what's going on in the Jesus story. I'm a little embarrassed about this because I hate personal illustrations. And I seldom use them. But I want to tell you the Manley story. I was born and raised in the parsonage. And we had youth camps. And we'd go off to these youth camps. And the way they did those particular youth camps were that the whole church, all the youth, furnished their own cooks, and each church had its own cabin and stayed in the cabin together. So you didn't have like we do with dormitories and just one cabin. So every church had their cabin, every church furnished their own cook, so forth, and their own overseers. So obviously my dad being pastor, he went and he took us all. So I went to youth camp since I was 2 years of age. And during this youth camp, there was a set swimming time. So my dad took me down in the shallow water of the lake, watched me. All the other teens are swimming. My dad's watching me. As I'm in the shallow And just before the end of the swimming time, he wanted to go out and take a swim. So he got a teenage girl from our church to watch me. So he walked down the long pier, came to the end of the pier, dove off, and as he hit the water, a divine voice, an overwhelming awareness, someone said, go back. Now. The minute he hit the water, turned around, rushed back, couldn't find the teenage girl. Couldn't find me. He began to frantically search through the water, found me, sitting on the bottom of the lake with about a foot of water above my head. Divine intervention. Well, you think you're on the plain of Moses. You think your story's equal to Jesus' story? God never intervenes without purpose. You think I'm an accident? You think it just happened? Divine intervention. Purpose. Let's talk about your story. Well, Manley, there's no divine intervention in my life. Oh, come on. Come on. Well, I didn't have a dad that was diving off. Oh, come on. Well, I wasn't in an ark floating down that. Oh, come on. There wasn't a Herod the Great after. Come on. Come on. Think. You know good and well you should have been dead 15 times as a teenager. How about 25 or 30? Do you know how many diseases you've been healed of and you didn't even know? Would you please tell me why you are in Lebanon, Tennessee? Out of all the places you could have been, would you please tell me why you're sitting in this building facing this way instead of this way? And do you have any idea? Can you even begin to track? Can you even begin to go back? And this happened, and then that happened, and then this took place, and God intervened here, and this was, and then it turned here, and here you are. God, I'm telling you, God never, never, ever intervenes without distinct purpose involved. And you have a story. Now, quickly, we got to get into the purpose. Intervention equals purpose. Purpose, you'll never guess, equals Jesus. The purpose is Jesus. The Moses story. Oh, Moses, of course, is spared, and his life is spared, and Pharaoh's daughter takes him in, and he's educated in the courts of Egypt, and he grows up, and he's 40 years of age, and he's supposed to deliver Israel, and he kills one Egyptian guard and runs off to exile. So he's in the wilderness for 40 years, and now he's 80 years of age, and a bush begins to burn and is not consumed, and a voice speaks and says, get yourself back down there and let's get on with the program. And lo and behold, do you know what that was all about? Well, he was going to be a lawgiver. It wasn't about the law, was involved, but it wasn't about the law. Well, he's going to help establish the nation. It wasn't about Israel. They were involved, but it wasn't about that. Well, great miracles were going to happen through Moses, the old staff thing, and hit the rock and water everywhere. The miracles were going to take place, but man, it wasn't about the miracles. It wasn't about the miracles. It wasn't about the law. It wasn't about Israel. You know what this whole thing was about? Jesus. Jesus was coming. Jesus was coming. Jesus is on the scene. Jesus is here. And everything that God did, can you comprehend that? Everything that God did in the man called Moses was all pointed in the direction and for the purpose of the person of Jesus Christ. The Jesus story. Oh, that's easy, isn't it? Everything that's going on in the life of Jesus is about what? Oh, so he could come and do miracles. No, it isn't. Oh, so he could tell us parables so we could argue theologically about them. No, it wasn't. So he could straighten out our theology. No, it wasn't. You know why God intervened in the life of Jesus? Well, so he could give us directions to go to heaven. No, it wasn't. It's so that he could be the way. See, he's not a direction giver. He is the way. Well, so he could furnish, so he could tell us where to get some bread to eat for the nutrition of our life. No, he is the bread. See, everything in the life of Jesus is about what? Jesus himself. Well, he's our example. No, he's not. He himself. Man, I wish I had another hour and a half to talk about that. I'll only take 45 minutes. Wouldn't it? Wow. See, this wasn't about anything except, the essence of the person of Jesus himself. So this is not about, he's a great teacher. This is not about, he's a great miracle worker. This is not about, he's a great theologian. This is not about any of that. This is about, the person of Jesus, who is the way, who is the truth, who is the light. There is not anything outside of him. So the Moses story is all about the Jesus story, and the Jesus story is all about the Jesus himself. Let me tell you about the Manley story. You know why God rescued me when I was 2 years of age? So I could preach. No. So I could be an evangelist. No. So I could be a pastor. No. You know why he rescued me? It's a Jesus deal. I was built. And do you know what the tragedy is? To get so wrapped up in a preaching career that you miss him. You know what the tragedy would be? To get so wrapped up in theology that you miss him. To get so wrapped up in the church structure, you miss him. To get so wrapped up in religious activities, you miss him. To get so wrapped up in, don't do that, stop that, do this, pray here, pray there, do this, read the Bible chapter a day. Wow, to get so wrapped up in that, the embrace of his person, you have missed. You have missed. The whole deal is about what? Him. Don't get wrapped up in the incidental details. I love to talk about this to teenagers and college students. What's God's will for my life? Jesus. Where should I go to college? Jesus. What should be my career? Jesus. And somehow, when you get all wrapped up in him, the incidental details begin to... If you can just get... I know this is startling new truth to you that the answer for every need of your life is the embrace of his person. And your whole story, the reason God has intervened in your life, is for Jesus. He might embrace you. You might know him in intimacy. You might be filled with him. He might captivate your life. How you doing with Jesus? Jesus, don't let us miss you. In this moment, may all that's distracted us, our careers, and you didn't intervene in my life so I could preach. You didn't intervene in my life so I could be a pastor. You didn't intervene in my life so I could be an electrician. You didn't intervene in my life so I could be a school teacher. You didn't intervene in my life so I could be a dad, I could be a mom. You didn't intervene in my life for only one reason. You intervened in my life that I might know you. And in knowing you, the fulfillment of all you've dreamed for me could take place. In the name of Jesus, bring us back to yourself. Captivate us in these days with yourself. Show us your face. Could we get personal with you? Could we get out of theology and could we get personal with you? Could we get out of activities and what's right and what's wrong? Could we get personal with you? Could we get really personal with you? Could we get over the forms and all the ceremonies connected with Christianity? And could we get personal with you? Could we know you? Could we know the warmth of your being? Could we feel the embrace of your person? You destined me for yourself. To miss that is to miss the purpose. Heads are bowed. I confess I have often gotten so involved in preaching and missed him. I confess I've gotten so involved in being right that I didn't lounge in his love. I confess I've become so project-oriented, so accomplishment-focused, that I missed him. I confess I've become so filled with myself, as if I were the purpose, that I've missed him. I've become so self-sufficient that I missed him. I've become so focused on how I was being treated that I missed him. I became so focused on my own feelings and my emotional upsets that I missed him. I'm confessing to you. Jesus, are you listening to my confession? I want the single sole purpose of my life be you. And while the Moses story was all about the Jesus story, oh, would you let my story be all about the Jesus? Altars open, heads are bowed. You got anything to confess? Have you got anything to confess? Have you become so filled with pride and I fear that there might be some who've become so filled with religious tradition and activities, deeds of life, that in the midst of all of that you don't know his embrace, you don't know his warmth, you don't sense the wonder of his presence, you don't know his forgiveness. Dear friend, based upon the thousands and thousands and thousands of direct divine interventions in your life, I invite you to a new embrace of his person. Moments of secret.